So welcome to the UNSD Brown Bags. My name is Alexander Loschke, and I will be moderating this Brown Bag today together with my colleagues Yusi Sang and Sean Lovell. We are very happy to have with us today our colleagues Haoyi Chen from UNSD and our colleagues from UN Women, Mika Mansukhani and Wissal Hmazzou, who will be talking about communicating gender data and branding, storytelling, and messaging. We will have an exciting talk with two objectives. So our speakers will present the process of developing a visual identity for the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on household surveys, and they will highlight strategies to effectively communicate about gender data to reach diverse audiences, focusing on visual communication strategies and drawing from UN Women's own initiatives. So let me now tell you a little bit more about our speakers today. We have with us Haoyi, who is the coordinator of the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Service. We have with us Mika, who is an outreach and advocacy specialist at UN Women, where she manages global communication for the Women Count program and runs Women Count Data Hub. She has worked in communication for gender and development within the UN system for more than 12 years and has produced UN Women's flagship report, Progress of the World's Women, along with other major print, web, and multimedia products. Wissal is a graphic designer who has worked with UN Women, UNDP, and FAO, as well as in the private sector to develop targeted brand identities, as well as engaging digital and print design. She was the designer behind the visual identity for the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. Now, just very quickly, a couple of practical things. We will first hear the presentations of our speakers, and we'll then have a Q&A session at the end. Please feel free to write comments and questions into the meeting chat at any time, but in our UNSD Brown Bags, we always encourage people to unmute themselves and ask the question themselves. This UNSD Brown Bag is being recorded and will be made available in the UN Internal Training Resources Group on the global network at yammer.com/UNstats. And we invite you to continue the discussions on the global network after the webinar. So now over to Haoyi. Haoyi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. You see, sorry, I'm not really presenting, just 1 minute of background. So our group was established in 2015, and we sort of struggled to find image or for our group. And then last year, we talked about developing a logo. And then our co-chair, we have two co-chairs, the World Bank and UN Women. UN Women co-chair Papa has offered the service of Mika to help us. As we moved along, and I realized developing logo is not just about logo, it's about a lot of other things. So Mika has really given us a lot of information on that, and I felt it was so interesting and so it's so new to me. And that's why we come up with the idea of this webinar. Mika will tell us a lot more about communication. Thank you so much, Mika and Wissal, for your help. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex and Haoyi. It's great to be here. My name is Mika, and I'm the outreach specialist at the Women Count program, which is UN Women's Gender Data Program. I also manage the Women Count Data Hub. Now, the way I've structured today's presentation is that I wanted to give a little bit of background on sort of the role of communication in gender data. And then I'll hand over to Wissal who is our graphic designer, who can talk through our approach to the ISWGHS visual identity and logo. And then if we have time, I'll come back and present some more examples from UN Women's own initiatives. So, just about me, I as I said, I do outreach for the Women Count program, but even before that, one of my roles has been always in, whether it was the progress of the World's Women Flagship report. My role has always been looking for ways to communicate complex data and research in accessible ways that help make sense for different kinds of audiences. And I've been doing that for over 3 years at the Women Count program. And I think that, these sorts of approaches help improve the use of data. And we've seen this happen in different ways through our strategy. So I want to take you through some of these ideas. I've, subtitled this presentation Branding, Storytelling, and Messaging. Firstly, because branding is really sort of the story that we tell about ourselves. It helps build recognition. It helps make sure that it helps generate our authority. So if people know that Women Count is UN Women's Gender Data Program, it helps to make sure that we have that sort of recognition in different spaces. Storytelling, of course, data, is very important in telling a story, but data should not be separated from context. So adding context to data helps tell compelling and convincing stories. And that's sort of an approach that we take in many different ways in the program. And of course, messaging. Messaging is really the content. So whatever tools or channels you use, messaging is really at the heart of what you're trying to convey. And so with that in mind, I want to take you through some ideas. So this is the importance of communication. I want to take you through, can you see my second slide? The importance of communication. I just want to make sure. Okay, great.
Yes.
So, from Women Count's own perspective, I want to highlight the importance of communication in our work. But first, one of the first distinctions I want to make is between dissemination and communication. So for many data producers, dissemination is the traditional form of sharing new data. Dissemination is a lot easier, more straightforward. It is a one-way activity. It provides direct access to the data, and it doesn't necessarily consider um, different user needs. And you can also add it to the end of a production cycle. But communication is a two-way activity. It is more engaged, and it is aimed at reaching specific target audiences. It is multi-directional, and it involves exchange and dialogue. And, I would argue that, look, there's no question, dissemination is easy. It's something that doesn't require as many resources. It's something that you can add on, but communication, while it's hard, you have to really think about it in terms of return on investment. Communication needs more effort and resources. You have to think about it sort of from the onset of your production. It is more deliberate, but it leads to a higher uptake of your data. And so that brings me to my next point on data production, the data production cycle and how communication fits in. So let's start at the bottom of the circle, design. So when you're designing, when you're conceptualizing what your product is going to be, there's usually a dialogue between users and producers to identify your data needs and your formats. And then that dialogue continues as you're sort of doing your development and your data production and so on. In your analysis as well, you're thinking, okay, how you should. This is an ideal scenario, of course. how will this data be used to meet needs? Are there policy gaps that need to be considered, etc.? And then when you're producing your outputs, your reports, infographics, web materials, and so on, these should be considered in line with user needs. And of course, finally, you have your active communication and dissemination of the product. And of course, thinking about how to target these different messages through different media and so on to have the highest uptake. And so I just wanted to also highlight 3 principles. Having a communication strategy really helps us, one, reduce data waste. Really, if you're producing data and no one sees it, it's like as if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? Thinking about data, all of the effort that goes into producing data, if you have a communication strategy behind it from the beginning, it can really help reduce that data waste and share all of this valuable information with a broader audience. Second, when you don't assume that your audience thinks like you can communicate more effectively. In other words, if you're understanding the diversity of the audience, you're able to target your messages more effectively. And similarly, thinking about both being broad in your reach and also being able to address specific target audiences helps to open the data up to everyone. And by all of this, I really don't mean to oversimplify. I think that data and research are complex, and I don't necessarily always think your right choice is to oversimplify your data. There's often a lot of work that goes um, into all of this research, and we have to embrace that. But all I want to highlight is that we need to use the right tools to reach the right audience. Um, and this brings me to my next point, which is how you choose your communication tools and strategies. So first, you think about who your audience is and what their needs are. Second, think about what channel is the best way to reach your audience. Choose a channel that will reach the biggest part of your audience, and also make sure that it is being communicated most effectively. For instance, if I want to reach NSOs with my data, Twitter is not going to be my best bet. I might want to have stakeholder consultations, and this is something that we have actually done in order to make sure that the right audiences see the data and are able to have access to it and consider ways in which to use it to, for decision makers, for policy purposes, and so on. And finally, your messages. The messages this is your content. This is what you want to convey. You have to think about what are you conveying and to whom. So taking these 3 sort of parts of your communication strategy will really help guide how you communicate. And so this brings me to the communication tool that has been a key objective in the Women Count communication strategy. This has been our objective number 1, is to develop a cohesive visual identity. And so this is, like I said, the story that we're telling about other people. It's helping build our recognition. While it is not necessarily branding is something that you don't always do with a knowledge product, it is just something to think about how you're presenting yourselves. And we have seen the effectiveness of the Women Count visual identity as in our different country offices. We are a global program with project offices all over the world. Having a coherent visual identity helps make sure that we are sort of communicating with one voice. There's recognition, and we have found, that this is effective. For instance, our formal name is Making Every Woman and Girl Count. And we kept finding that people were calling us, oh, every woman, every child, making every girl count. And so there was a lot of confusion. So while we have retained the formal name, our branding really focuses on the key things that we want to say, women count. So, and our visual identity is linked to data. And so having that coherence really has paid off and based on feedback that we've got at the country level. And so we've taken the same principles and applied them to the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. And so I'm going to hand over to Wissal here, who is our graphic designer, to tell you about our approach with this logos. And as Haoyi had mentioned, we started off thinking about, okay, with Haoyi saying, okay, we need a logo. And what we soon realized is that, you know, a logo in isolation is really just not going to be enough. You really need to think about a comprehensive use and application of the logo. And so thinking about creating a universe, a visual identity, to make sure that the logo makes sense in different applications. So it's a much more complex exercise than just coming up with a nice looking logo. And so with that, I'll hand over to Wissal, and if we have some time, I'll come back and share some more examples from UN Women's work. Wissal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mika. Thank you, and hi everyone. So I'm not seeing my slide yet, but like Mika mentioned in this part of the presentation, I will be talking about visual identity and the design principles that we applied in the making of the visual identity of the ISWGHS logo. So starting with what is a visual identity? A visual identity is what makes your brand unique and instantly recognizable. So this is an umbrella term that encompasses every visual element of the brand. So from the logo, typography, color palette, imagery, creative design, graphics, and physical assets. And when all of these elements are put together, they create a cohesive and memorable brand story. So now we're going to look at each of these elements, starting with the logo. The logo is how your brand identifies, using a particular symbol, type, design, or in our case, both. Every element of the logo contributes to the brand identity, including including the font choice. The logo will determine the colors, the font choice, and other imagery and graphic style. So logo is not just communication, it is identification. A logo should not tell the whole story or everything about the organization. Rather, it should follow this criteria. Number one, it needs to be appropriate, meaning the design style should make sense for the industry. For example, if I'm designing for fashion, it needs to be elegant. If I'm designing for a sports brand, for example, it needs to be bold. It needs to show movement. Number two, a logo should be distinct. It should be easy to remember and stand out. Number three, it needs to be simple and timeless. Too much details can be distracting and very hard to see at a small scale. Which leads us to number four, a logo should be versatile. It should be able to adapt to various design applications it will be placed on, digital or print. It needs to be visible at a big scale as well as a very small scale. The component number two is typography. Oh, we're still on the logo. So with these criteria in mind, we can move to second slide, sorry. The ISWGHS logo. Yes. So using this criteria, we designed the logo with symbols of a check mark, a checked box to convey a survey, and a house. So so with very simple typography, the light for the Inter-Secretariat, and a bold, bigger type for working group on household surveys. So keeping the design clean and simple, and also thinking ahead of all of these graphic elements and how they can be used, to create a visual language. When creating the logo, it is very important to think ahead of the different uses. So these are different versions of the same logo. The primary logo using the full name, it can be used in publications, in websites, and that's essentially when you don't have a space concern. We also have a stacked version with the acronym, and it can be used as a profile picture on your social media, for example, when you don't have a lot of space. The second component is typography. Typography means the shape or styling of text. Beyond what your words are saying, the scale, the arrangement of text is very important, and it'll impact your visual identity. Going back to the logo, for example, we wanted to highlight working group on household surveys. So we made it bold and bigger, while the Inter-Secretariat is in light and smaller font. We are also keeping it simple by using one font family, the Source Sans Pro, a font that works not only for the word mark of the logo, but also as a headline and body copy font. Our third component is a color palette. So colors set the mood of the brand identity. We assign meaning to things based on colors. And for the ISWGHS logo, we are using 2 shades of blue. We chose these shades of blue so that the logo can work with multiple agencies that are also using the blue. We also introduced some accent colors that can be used to highlight information or visualize data, break consistency in a web page or a social media feed. And our fourth component is graphics. So graphics are a huge part of building a unique identity. And we'll come back when I mentioned using the elements in the logo to create a visual language. That's what we mean by graphics. Every icon, illustration, button is a chance to showcase your brand's identity and to make sure that the consistency of the brand is there and it's cohesive in every touch point. We're going to show some examples of the visual elements of the logo and how they can be used to create a cohesive visual identity and how it can be consistently used in the physical assets such as flyers, posters, publications, and social media assets. So first, we'll show in some examples of cover designs. The shapes in the logo can be used as a standalone graphic, or if you look at the first example on the left, we're using the house. We flipped it to create an arrow, and it's it's tying the logo to the rest of the page and balancing the elements on the page while leading the reader's eye towards the title. Another example is the inside pages of a publication. Again, we're using the same identifier with the headers to lead the eye towards the text, but also always recalling the visual identity in the logo. Another example is using these shapes in social media assets. They give a dynamic feel to the page, and they're also reinforcing the visual identity. Along with the colors, this is an example of how you can use the accent colors to break consistency and the dominance of the blue color. One last example is a flyer for an event. Again, here we're using the colors and the shapes to recall the logo and always reinforce the visual identity. So to summarize, a brand's visual identity is central to how audiences will perceive and interact with your content. So using these visual elements consistently over time will strengthen your perception of the brand and help unify all your communication products. That's it for me. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mika.
Thank you, Wissal. And as you can see, the effort in thinking about a logo took us to creating a whole visual language that helps us think about how the logo will be used, what the publications will be looking like, and how all of the different communication assets are informed by this visual language that the logo is a part of. So if we have a few more minutes, I wanted to take you through a couple of examples. Just Alex, let me know how much more time we have. I shouldn't take too long.
No, you're good. You're good
Okay.
in time.
Great. So I thought I would start off with an example from our most recent output, which is our 13-country rapid gender assessment on the impacts of violence against women during COVID-19. So these rapid gender assessments were done by the Women Count program and was funded by the Gates Foundation. We did a study over 13 countries on women's experience and knowledge of violence, feelings of safety inside and outside the home, and their general well-being. In that process of once we had collected and analyzed all of the data, we produced a report called Measuring the Shadow Pandemic, Violence Against Women During COVID-19. And we released that in time for the 16 Days campaign, which is, as many of you know, a global campaign to end gender-based violence that runs from 25th November to 10th December. And so we released this on the 24th of November, which is the day that we in the US commemorated the International Day to End Violence Against Women. And so we timed it very carefully in line with that. We created a data dashboard on the WomenCount Data Hub so that users could engage with all of the different indicators in the study and see the results. And we created a social media package based on these findings to contribute to the broader outreach of the 16 Days campaign. So here is what we did in the report. So the report highlights all of the findings. We created sort of a brief infographic that really distills all of this, all of the key findings. And this is sort of visual storytelling. We are creating, we are making sure that our readers are very, very aware of all of the main takeaways from this study. So this is what we found. For instance, 45% of women reported they or a woman they know has experienced violence since COVID-19. 1 in 2 women feel unsafe walking alone at night. We made these, we used sort of the infographic style to make sure that all of this key information was provided in a snapshot format, while the rest of the report went through in more detail providing the context of these findings. And then, of course, we went one level deeper and went even more granular in our social media asset. So we created this social media asset. In fact, this was done by Wissal. 7 in 10 women think domestic violence has increased since COVID-19, taking a very, very simple extract of one of our findings, but making sure that the context and the story is always there. So on the left of the slide, this is the copy that goes on, say, a Twitter asset, meeting the 280 character limit, providing a link to the report. So it always sort of links back to the report, providing a hashtag for 16 days so that you can sort of track conversations around this. And so making sure that we're highlighting that this is a findings from a report so that you're not seeing just this factoid without the context around it. And then here is the dashboard that we had created for the Data Hub, highlighting, so you can, from this drop down, you can select an indicator. So this is women who reported that they are women they know experienced a form of violence since COVID-19. And this allows us to see it in a bar chart format where you see all of the results from highest to lowest with the pooled sample as well. And then you also have a table format. And of course, once I share this presentation, I'll make sure to put all of the links in so you can actually see these, because for this presentation, I only did a snapshot. There's a lot more examples here, but I'm going to skip ahead in the interest of time and show you a couple of examples from a Progress of the World's Women 2019. So Progress of the World's Women 2019 is about women's rights within families, and it's a huge print report. It's our flagship report at UN Women, and we used a lot of infographics to highlight complexity. So one of the things I really want to make sure to convey is that data can be very complex, and we shouldn't always have to shy away from that complexity, but use our visual tools at hand to highlight that complexity. So here we have an infographic on household types showing global and regional averages. So this is where it draws the viewer in to spend a little bit more time looking at, okay, so here's the global distribution of households showing couples with children at 38% of all global households. And the point of this is to really show that couples with children is not the predominant household type, but there are other types of households, and the size of the circle is sort of visually conveying that. And then as long as you follow horizontally along, say like across the top, you have the 6 regions, and then the regional distribution also following that same visual language of having the size of the circles. So you know exactly where you have the most of this type of household distribution. And then we did sort of a country level distribution as a spread, where we didn't highlight the country names because of space, but you're able to see what countries in a region have a couple with children households, and what that sort of spread looks like. And then we have a few of these in the report, and we took one of them and actually turned them into an infographic. So we had one on migration flows. And so here, this is a Sankey chart that was featured as a static graph in the report, and we published it on the Data Hub in an interactive format that allowed us to really get a little bit more granular, right? So here you can see what the regions of origin are, and where these are going. So I've highlighted one for you here, and so you can see that 79% of female migrants from Europe and Northern America are going to other countries in the same region. And so you're able to, if you click on any of these threads, you get a little bit more information about where people are coming from, where they're going, and what their distribution is. And so I just wanted to highlight some of these. I'm going to stop here with this final message that says, communicating gender data effectively can take a lot of work, but it has a high payoff. From our recent report, for instance, we have had coverage in the New York Times, in other RGAs. We our gender assessments, because of all of our outreach work we've done, we have had impacts at the country level where country stakeholders have taken on board the data and are using them for policy change. So again, communication takes work, dissemination is easier, but communication has a higher payoff. So with that, I will leave you and take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mika and Wissal, for this presentation. I would now like to invite people to ask questions. As I said before, it would be nice if you can unmute yourself, but if you're a little bit shy, we can also ask the question for you. So in the chat, I already see one question by Ling Yang. Ling Yang, I'm not sure if you can ask the question yourself. Please do so. And
thanks, Alex. I'm feeling a little bit shy, but I will try. My question is very simple. The visualizations, wonder what tools were used. That's all.
Are you referring to the tools used for the data hub, the interactive tools? So actually, we have our colleague Samrat also on the chat here, and I maybe would like to put him on the spot. I know that he uses high charts. Our dashboards that we have are often our main dashboards, our SDG dashboards that I didn't talk about here are custom, but maybe Samrat, you can speak a little bit about the tools that you use.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Lingyan. Yeah, definitely we do use high charts a lot, but like we do also use a few other charting libraries like mchart and D3. So these were some of the 3 libraries that we predominantly use in our visualization. I hope that answers the base question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Samrat. It's also good to see that our former colleague is also here. Haoyi, I see your hand up. You want to come in? Please go ahead.
Yes, so congratulations. I really love the charts. I know the violence against women data, data from the RGAs have been largely quoted from major newspapers, New York Times, and many, many others. So I just wanted to hear from you, what have you done to make it happen?
So what did we do in terms of media outreach?
Yeah, communication.
So again, sort of this kind of involves work right from the start. And, you know, my colleague Jessa, who has been leading this work, is also here and maybe can speak to some of that. But we've been really working with our UN Women communications team. We timed the report very carefully to coincide with this big global campaign, the 16 Days campaign. We, you know, did everything that we could to make the key messages available ahead of time so that our you know, with the SG's office, our senior management, so that it could sort of permeate all of their talking points. And in fact, data points from the report made it to the SG's statement for the commemoration of the International Day to End Violence Against Women, and that was a really good way to make sure that the findings stick. So doing all of this work, working closely with our communications you know, team here at UN Women right from the start, you know, sharing with them early drafts of the report so that they know what the messages are going to be, developing the key messages earlier on, even while you're developing, finalizing the report. All of these sort of were steps in that direction, making sure that we are sort of equipped to be able to deal with press requests and so on that come in as a result. So timing it with the right moment definitely helps.
Thank you. Inviting more colleagues to please raise your hand and ask questions. If I would have one question, and more from a practical point of view than using coming to this visual identity that you have created for the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Service. I was wondering, in practical terms, for the end user, how difficult is it to then apply this visual identity, for instance, on social media, or producing a banner for an invitation for an event and so on? Do I need to, for doing that, do I need to go back to you as the designer, or is this something that can be done by myself as a user?
So there are a few things. One is, you know, we've created this visual identity, but we are also talking with Haoyi to create a set of templates and assets that enable the usage of this visual identity in different contexts, such as publication templates, banner templates, flyers, and so on. And that is what we have done with the Women Count visual identity. We have, first and foremost, a set of branding guidelines. It tells you how and how not to use this logo and visual identity, what the colors are, etc. So everyone has these guidelines. Then the logos provided in different formats. We have publication templates and so on. So all of these resources can be provided to people to use this branding. So other members of the ISWGHS, if they're presenting, creating a publication as part of the ISWGHS, they can use these resources to build them.
Okay. Then I have another question here in the chat. I'm not sure if you want to come in. Otherwise, I can just ask the question for you. So there's a question about what tools you have used to create the logos. So the logos for this visual identity.
So for the logos, we use Adobe Creative Cloud. So for the logo, I used Adobe Illustrator.
And any further questions? Maybe I would have another one. Sorry if I'm asking so many questions, but so how long does it take you to develop such a visual identity? I mean, I have absolutely no idea how long that could take, and I admire your work, but maybe you can say a little bit about this, how long the process took, and how many people were involved and how it worked.
So maybe Haoyi, maybe all three of us can contribute to this question.
Yes,
because
please.
It took, we started off this conversation earlier. We had some meetings on sort of the utility of creating a visual identity for this group, trying to figure out what what it would be used for, how it can interact with, keeping in mind there are member agencies involved. So how can we sort of make sure that we allow the identities of both agencies to sort of not, these visual identities not to contradict the identities of our member agencies as well. So all of these considerations. So we did a lot of sort of brainstorming initially. And I think that then we were able to work with Wissal, doing a lot of back and forth. Wissal, maybe you can speak to that a little bit, about the time to sort of really think through and absorb, understand what the ISWGHS is from a design perspective, and then use it to create the logo.
Yes, so the process on my side from the briefing stage of like Mika and how explaining what the ISWGHS does, and the different challenges that we're facing, which having the member agencies and the visual identity that we are developing not clash. So after that, the work for me starts in doing some research of symbols and how I can sort of translate some of the keywords that are in the name of the working group into visually. So doing that, I think I've developed quite a few logos, chosen 3 that were the strongest options and shared them. And then we had a talk about that, and there was quite a bit of back and forth to come to that final product, to that final logo. And also, like, while developing these options, at the same time I was always thinking ahead beyond just the logo, the possibilities that each of those logos that I was presenting can have in creating the visual language and the overall look. So so yeah, I think that's why we had to like present not just the logo on its own, but the different the various ways that it can be used. And even without the logo, just having those shapes recall like that the whole visual identity. Even if you don't look at the logo, you know where it belongs and who it belongs to. So that was basically, that's the goal of a visual identity. Even if you remove the logo, you have a style that is recognizable. I hope that answers your question, but that was basically the process.
No, yeah, I mean, yes, go ahead.
Just not to mention that in the middle of our finalizing, and then our coaches were proposing changing the names of the group, so that adds a little bit a mini month of that's why you see two shades of color, sort of emphasizing on certain words and downplaying other words, trying to, and in this process Mika kept telling us less is more, simpler is better, because there were a lot of proposals on, can we add a slogan, can we do this, and then as both Wissal and Mika had presented, when simpler is always better, and then you can't see them when they're very tiny. But I have to say, it's really like a super crash course for me, because when I first received this stack of materials, like, why do I have different versions? What do they mean? Why are they stacked version? Why are they simplified? Now I think it's really, really helpful. So it took overall, I think it took a year and a half. No, a year. Did we start like March? Yeah, no, wait. Yeah, a year, something like that.
A year.
Yes.
I think we started conversations at the end of last year.
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't always take this long, and the women count branding didn't, but getting approvals, especially in this sort of environment, right? There are co-chairs and so on. Suddenly the name is being revisited. That puts a pause on things. So it was a bit longer than we had expected, but I think the end result speaks for itself. And Haoyi, I'm really happy because you remember and are repeating my motto, and this is what I always say: less is more. I think that we have a tendency and a need to be as comprehensive as possible. And we have to remember, a logo is not a research paper. So we don't have to say and for everything else. It's all about distilling a key essence that you want to convey, and let everything else around it do the talking. And so I'm glad we were able to retain the length, which is already lengthy enough as it is, maintain that, and with Wissal's help, make sure that we also maintain something that an identity that's very strong and bold.
Thanks. Yeah, so I see another two questions here. One hand by Nemi. Nemi, you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Mika and Wissal. This is really great stuff. And I think you've just basically given us a sense of identity, which which really helps in our reporting and in the messages that we send out. I did want to ask, though, about the use of color. How do you determine what colors to use? So is it based on the story that you're telling, or is it, how do you just determine what colors to use for the branding or the logos?
So, yeah. Okay. So for the logo, like Mika mentioned, we wanted the logo to be not to clash with other agencies, other member agencies, which most of them, if not all of them, used UN Blue. So we wanted something that is similar but still identifiable, still stands out. So that's why we're using two shades of blue. So that's that's the path that led us to these colors. For the accent colors, we just wanted something that is bold, especially for like data or for coming back to the social media assets, something that can break the use of blue, which is going to be the dominant, the two dominant colors. So we wanted to use bold colors that will look good in digital as well as in print. That's why I came up with that palette. So there are all colors that will work well with the blue, the two blue shades that we are using. So there are two things to consider here. The color palette needs to work well together. The colors need to work well next to each other, as well as give you as many color combinations as possible. And also be relevant to the sector that you're working in. So.
Thank you. Yeah, okay.
Just also quickly add that there's a hierarchy, right? So these are, as Wissal said, these are accent colors. So it wouldn't be that we would have like necessarily bright green cover. It would, you know, all of the bold colors are meant to be used sort of tastefully as accent colors to your predominant color palette.
Thank you. I see another question by Florina in the chat. Florina, you want to come in? If not, I can also ask it for you. I mean, it's a very short question. So the question was where we can find the media kit for this visual identity. I guess this was what Florina was referring to.
So I think Haoyi can attest to that. It's something that we're now going to be starting to develop, and once we have that, we can share that. Haoyi, right?
Yes.
Okay, then there's another question here in or comment by Indira. Indira, you would like to come in? Otherwise I can just read it out. So dissemination versus communication is a big area of need for statisticians, and it is great to see the progress made by gender statistics and the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Survey. So congratulations, great work. Yeah, I would like also to come in with that. So it really looks good. It's also, I mean, it shows also that designing such a logo and the visual identity and all that comes with it is not really done in 5 minutes, right? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of thinking going in there, a lot of communication with a client and between the client and the designers. So really, really great work. If there are no other questions, because I don't see any hands right now. So last chance to ask another question to Mika and Wissal. If this is not the case, then I would like to I would invite everybody to unmute themselves right now. And maybe if you want, you can also turn on the camera and give Mika, Wissal, and Haoyi a big round of applause. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your presentation. So we will share the recording of today's event as I mentioned, on the global network. As this is a more internal talk for the UN system, we will put it in the UN Internal Training Resources group on the global network, so we will find it there. And we will also share the presentation slide there. Just a final word. So this has been the last UNSD Brown Bag for this year. So happy holidays already now and a happy new year. And we see each other again next year with more global network webinars and UNSD Brown Bags. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.